Good evening to Dan Winter in South France. Good morning to Paul Harris in Western Australia. Western Canada.
I wish.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome.
And good afternoon from Roger Green here in New York. So a little bit about myself. I'm the director of the Breakthru-Technologies and the Academy Healing Nutrition and the Academy Sacred Geometry. It's a unified field. And that's a topic for today's webinar, as well as the electrical understanding of longevity and anti-aging. So we're going to begin with a discussion with Dan and Paul about some of the terminology that we use in the Theraphi device. And we're going to discuss some of the history of it and also get you up to speed about some of the latest research around stem cells. And we'll also be talking later on about the Aquify, the new development from the team. And then we're going to go on to talk about some of the other associated technologies, for instance, the hydrogen project and so forth. And Dan's prepared a presentation, and we're going to be able to do some questions and answers later on. So those who are new to the Zoom software, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A. And that's the section that I want you to officially put your questions in, and we'll be able to find them all in one place rather than the chat window. So, Dan, how are you doing there?
Great. Thanks for putting this together, Roger. Always a team leader. Wonderful. Happy to be here.
So, Dan, we often use these terms like phase conjugation and neg entropy and centripetal forces, you know, to describe what the Theraphi is doing and how it works. But these are terms that you have been, you know, educating the world in for a few decades now with your work around, you know, the so-called fractal field. Now, the original Priori device back in the 70s, the way Priori started his R&D around all of this was that he actually noticed that his bowl of fruit next to some high voltage, you know, electrical machinery, the fruit never decayed. After, you know, several weeks of it being there, the fruit didn't decay. And Tesla, of course, noticed, you know, remarkable results just being around his high voltage equipment. So with Priori, this was the reason why he started his research and development. The French government ended up spending over $15 million on his technology. And in a way, they were the first to start to use, you know, the concepts of phase conjugation. So can you just sort of take us through some of those principles of how did that happen? Because if we start to understand that, we've really got the key to longevity and anti-aging, you know, from a perspective of using electricity and so forth.
Well, yes, thanks for asking the right question. As Paul has often mentioned, lots of people experienced healing and really wonderful effects to their bodies in the big blue sparks in Tesla's lab. And now physics is coming newly to the awareness that the blue spark, the component of it that's well known to be, quote unquote, a bit of a small black hole, the electron, electronegativity, is associated with negative ion wind. And negative ion wind is well known medically to be profoundly healing. It's proven. And we now know also that negative ions, which are very healing, are just about as fragile as the plasma that comes from Theraphi, that negative ions die if there's too much metal or electrosmog or bad stuff, synthetics around, and so does the charged cloud of plasma from Theraphi. So electronegativity seems to be key to this. And then the other beautiful thing that you bring up, which is very appropriate, is about, you know, the orange did not decay. And we have seen, first of all, Priori saw dramatic germination, growth effects on plants, all kinds of demonstrations of incredible growth effects. And we've been getting amazing reports of growth and plant growth from the Theraphi plasma as well. So the question then becomes, what's the physics? And that's my specialty. I guess I am the quote unquote explainer here. but we do believe that, I always taught that a seed will germinate if it's centripetal, very simply, if it's electrically able to implode, because that creates a suction, literally a tractor beam. So to know whether a seed is alive or dead is to know whether it can suck in, implode, attract its first nutrient. And that electrical power to be implosive then is obviously related to life. And so the key here is to understand how you make an electric field centripetal, implosive, drawing charge towards center. Actually, we don't believe that Antoine Prieur ever knew what phase conjugation was, and never knew what golden ratio was, never knew that he needed a pair of opposing plasma tubes to actually conjugate properly. But one thing that he did trip over was a frequency signature that apparently he got from Lakhovsky and Rife and Tesla. And actually, this makes sense, because later when we saw the key frequencies as used, there were 4 or 5 frequencies in the published reports on Prieur that fell right bang on my equation, 80 hertz and 30 hertz, etc. So we later knew that the equation I wrote about phase conjugate negentropy, that is to say simple charge implosion, I took Planck, the musical key signature of the universe, multiplied simply by golden ratio. Then I was done. It's pretty simple. I didn't do anything else. And I got a frequency series which predicted largely what frequencies that Prieur actually used. And that was the day in that conversation that Paul and I decided to build the Theraphi together, actually. When we saw that we recognized the principle behind. And we believe that Prieur went bust basically because no one could know how it worked, the principle, and therefore optimize it. And also, of course, today, now the electronics that Paul uses are much more economic than in Prieur's day. So, but to try to finish that thought very briefly, and Roger has cautioned us here tonight, we're not going to do advanced physics, we're going to do simple visual physics. But to try to finish that, well, what makes a field centripetal? If you visualize this wave emerging from Planck, and visualize a sine wave in the center of the symbol of the Tao, being Planck, and you multiply by golden ratio cascade, you get a caduceus right out of Hermes called phase conjugation. And if you rotate that, you get pine cone pairs, kissing noses, very simple. And that causes an implosion of charge at the Planck threshold, which accelerates charge coherently through the speed of light into longitudinal EMF, a compressional wave. And we have some pictures, and we could do that. And that leads into a conversation about why that suction to center is self-organizing and negentropic. So we can go there when you're ready, Roger, maybe dig out the pictures.
No, we're ready. And also last week with Paul, I got him to define some terms like time reversal and negentropy. So maybe when you get a chance, we can also cover some of those definitions.
Well, so I got this one of my favorite pictures up here, and I'm really glad that you asked about time reversal, because I'm hot to trot to talk about that tonight. Actually, in fact, I'd like Paul's thought on this, but you see, I'm really a little bit upset at Einstein for talking about bending time-space instead of really realizing what time is. Time is merely a name for the fact that charge spins. It's spin or rotation of charge, and that spin has a period which we call time. So time reversal is actually simply spin reversal, going backward in a path of spin. Very important to recognize that, because when you get these waves to do this thing called phase conjugation, and this is the picture we have in front of us, and most of you have seen this picture before. We used this at our conference that Roger helped sponsor this year in France, actually, and we're just showing that most of the inertia of the electromagnetic fields that we use, for example, our radios, is called transverse EMF, electromagnetic fields. And as you see on the left here, that wave goes up and down. I think our animations even play here, although I think the screen refresh rate, you might not see.
No, it's playing okay, Dan. Yep, we're getting our little ripple there.
Cool, wonderful. So when the wave goes down on the left side of that pine cone, it's going up and down, called transverse, up and down. And that kind of inertia will not put the squeeze on. And you know, if you're doing love correctly, you need to put the squeeze on. And so that simultaneously arrive of compression pressures called longitudinal or compressional waves is what needs to come out on the right-hand side, called longitudinal electromagnetic field. Now, sound waves are mostly like that, but electromagnetic waves, the part that we use is not like that. They're transverse. But when you get the electromagnetic wave doing this longitudinal magic, cool stuff happens. And Tom Bearden and many people were very clear that if you want to make healing, you got to make this longitudinal wave on the right-hand side. And the way that works is inertia going up and down enters the pine cone. It goes down this perfect caduceus called Hermes, caduceus, called phase conjugation. And it's compressed, and the inertia does perfect translation of vorticity and comes out the right-hand side as a compressional longitudinal wave. And when compressional waves meet in symmetry, that's when you get magic. For example, the first nuclear reaction on the planet was called implosion for that reason. And if you want to heal a cell, or if you want to affect nuclear critical mass, all the fun stuff happens when you have this longitudinal compressional wave, including faster than light and action at a distance, because when that longitudinal electromagnetic wave, which will go through about anything, accounts for all the spiritual conversations, when that crosses again at a distance, it will resynthesize the transverse up and down component and do then again heat containment and action at a distance. And so now you can see why Einstein was wrong to call all action at a distance spooky. And that's good, because we get lots of action at a distance with Theraphi plasma, and it's not spooky. So anyway, that's an introduction to what longitudinal waves are. And now, to try to be coherent here, we need to answer Roger's question. Roger was asking about time reversal. Well, when time reversal was first measured in physics, and this is where I'm interested in Paul's thought as well, it was when they caused lasers to meet exactly like this. They take 4 lasers, actually 2 opposing lasers, and have them precisely meet in opposing directions, 180 degrees out of phase. And they meet in what's called a phase conjugate mirror, which is a super high dielectric, very efficient, capacitive, barium strontium titanate kind of thing, that allows the laser's wavelength to converge and implode very precisely down to the Planck threshold. So the lasers kiss perfectly. They phase conjugate. And that's the first time in optics, phase conjugate mirror, they named and measured time reversal and negentropy. That was the first time in physics that time reversal and negentropy was measured. Now, here is Roger telling us we want to teach people how to get younger. And we're saying, well, time reversal is possible. Okay, cool. You know, where to sign me up, put in my quarter. But actually, there's some little caveats here in what the physics discovered, which was that you could only time reverse backwards, or you could only time reverse, period, toward increased order. Now that's very important, very cool. Later, it's going to give us some clues about how far you can time reverse a stem cell. And in stem cells, they talk about time reversal all the time. So it'd be really nice to understand this, you know. And in physics, what's clear is that you can time reverse rusted steel back to unrusted, but not the reverse. So actually, when physics says time reversal, remember, all time is rotation or spin. And bending time is actually increasing spin rate only, which is basically we accelerate metabolism, we accelerate time, we accelerate spin by conjugating in the Theraphi field. And everybody reports, the heart speeds up a little bit, acceleration, circulation speeds up, awareness speeds up, because we cause the pine cones to implode. Well, so that means, I believe, that when physics says time reversal, they mostly, if not only, mean negentropy. They mean taking it back to a state of increased order. So you can't take something back to disorder. So actually, you're returning something to a geometry of increased order is a better definition of time reversal than the words time reversal itself.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right there, Dan. People do get confused with the terminology time reversal because they think we're going you know, back to the 19th century or something, you know. So yeah, you know, increased order. Paul, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I guess it's just, you know, time reversal has been used in signal transmission and repeater stations and things like this in the fiber optics as part of the communication systems between the transmitter and the receiver. They've utilized it. So science kind of looks at it as more, you know, they're not talking about going back to order, but they're talking about a way of signal processing to keep the integrity of the signal, I guess. So in essence, yeah, I suppose it's like keeping the order of the signal strong throughout the transmission.
Yes, often when in physics, when they talk about time reversal and signal processing, they actually mean signal inversion, which is like looking at it in a mirror, really, quite literally. The thing that's cool is the process of that inversion reduces noise.
Yeah.
Actually increases order. And that's the fun part. You can actually, using what's called time reversal and phase conjugate optics, you can take a microscope where the optics is blurry and fix it. It's proven. It's very cool.
Yeah.
So that brings us to our question about neg entropy and increased order, which is the next slide.
That was probably very similar to what Rife was doing with his microscope, with the way he was splitting the light.
Interesting.
Universal.
Yeah. That very, very interesting point. I mean, we believe what happened with Raymond Royal Rife was the birefringent z-axis of that quartz was splitting the coherent light into a reference beam and an interference beam, and they were split apart, and the reference beam would bounce through the bacteria, and the interference beam would bounce through the bacteria, and the reference beam would not. And then you would take those two beams of light and you'd rotate the plane of polarity back into each other and create a shadow by which you could disobey the law of physics that says you can't see anything smaller than that wavelength with which you are looking. But the thing that's cool is when you merge them back together, they would, if they merge correctly, they would conjugate in the sense that they would add and multiply, so that the whole time reversal thing then comes, that net increased order could be applicable there as well. Very complex, interesting optics in the Rife scope. And actually, interestingly, Rife came up with frequency signatures, which were implicate on Prairie as well. And Lakowski was well aware that he was using golden ratio in that whole school. So, yes. So the question then becomes, as we have on the screen here, and I called it rejuvenation. You know, Roger was calling it age reversing. We've been calling it rejuvenation. And maybe that's a safe word, I'm not sure, but it seems to apply here that basically, you know, if the fountain of use is a burning fountain, if actually that burning fountain is a plasma flame that looks like golden ratio, you know, the flame in mine. So that's a fountain of youth. We call it rejuvenation. And we think that's what those light bulbs in Egypt, which became the logo of Theraphi, thanks to Paul, they were actually rejuvenation devices. So we want to know what makes an electric field that helps with rejuvenation. And what we're saying is that as the waves go down to that Planck threshold, using that equation, not only are they compressed, but they implode so centripetally that they actually create suction toward that center. And actually what we believe here on the bottom right is that, as you see, not just the wavelengths, but because of the golden ratio, the phase velocities add and multiply recursively coherently, because golden ratio allows that exclusively. And the phase velocities adding and multiplying means that some of that charge is accelerating toward that center. And that's called charge implosion. And our new physics paper with our new physics and mathematician partner explains and actually produces what we believe is the proof that that is the reason gravity exists and life itself, actually. So that's a suction for charge towards center, because physics to this day has never known why an object falls to the ground, or in fact, why any field is centripetal. And yet when we made the measurements, obviously they are golden ratio. This is a top-down view of DNA and every living protein. And oh, by the way, I wrote the equation, the proof that this is a top-down view of hydrogen. So The charge that's imploding through there creates suction of charge towards center. And when the charge all converges at that Planck plate, that center, and this is the image to the left, what happens is that not only have the waves added and multiplied, but all waves that are not in phase are canceled. And that's the result. The result of that is increased order. That basically this is a way of sorting into phase. It's the same reason the way the witch used a pentagram, because, you know, yes, it'll determine if your intention is pure. Well, you know, when the wave enters the perfect implosive vortex, only the waves that can be perfectly shared in golden ratio, which is the definition of fractality, self-reference, self-embedding, self-similarity, non-destructive compression, all idealized by golden ratio. So once waves go through that perfect implosive center, only the shareable waves survive, which means ones that can be sorted. And the practical example, of course, is that we now know the death experiences are electrically contagious. And we know why, because it's a small black hole that's needed to get your plasma or charge through the wormhole that is death. So this is the physics we think of how you produce increased order in electric field. And we do this broad spectrally in Theraphi, and Paul and I can talk more about how we do that.
Sure. Well, Dan, I think, you know, we can keep the flow happening now, because you've got some slides that you want to share with us to take us through some more concepts here and some more technology. So
yeah, I'll do about just like 10 or so slides, just a few, just very briefly the background here. So for example, we knew even when we first tested this in the first days in Perpignan, and Paul was there, the doctor came in, had just cut his finger, and within about 3-5 minutes, we were able to eliminate localized pain rather quickly. And we have many reports, in fact, hundreds. So why is centripetal charge the electrical opposite of pain? And you know what, we did a presentation in Tremurti recently about this, and this is a slide from that talk. Basically, you know that if you squeeze on a wound, it reduces the pain. Well, obviously, the electrical metaphor for that, in my opinion, is the fact that pain is the charge that bleeds from the liquid crystal of fractality of the body, where the fractality is broken. So by restoring compression, you have the electrical opposite of pain. It's actually quite obvious. And so I just mentioned in that talk that I had worked with Robert O. Becker. I had the good fortune at the University of Syracuse in his lab there, and he was the one who proved that if you increase the current of injury across the tadpole's tail would regenerate even when it wasn't supposed to. And so the voltage across the wound, if you add to that pressure, and it's a DC pressure, obviously you increase self-regeneration. So there's precedent there. And this was Bill Tiller. I spoke speaking of this often. You've seen this slide before, that basically Bill Tiller, who I knew quite well, also proved that focused human attention causes charge fields to compress. And I'm the first one, I think, to explain why. So this leads us to Elizabeth Rauscher's famous trials. This was her device. She had a magnetic series of harmonics. This was the frequencies here. And this power spectra, these frequencies are low frequency magnetics, dramatically reduced pain in her FDA trials. She had just simply synthesized the low frequency magnetic field around a healthy elbow and then reproduced that for an elbow with pain. And sure enough, and it turns out that the harmonics she used, 50, 80, 130, 211, 342, fit my equation perfectly. And this is my equation. It is simply Planck length and time times whole number exponents of golden ratio, which predicts 3 radii of hydrogen, ADP, the most important molecule in the body, the exact 2 frequencies only that make photosynthesis happen. So photosynthesis is phase conjugate, negentropic charge collapse, as is anything that's emerging from chaos. Predicts the British foot, the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics for breath. It predicts the most important blood pressure frequency in the body, the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, which is the most important heart rate variability, 0.1 hertz LF component. Predicts the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, precessional year. You get the idea that anything that's on this wavelength can implode accurately, defining the sacred, defining charge implosion, defining non-destructive charge collapse. And it's interesting that psychologists today always begin with the idea of collapsing the emotion and therefore getting it sorted. This is another slide about phase conjugate magnetics. We'll go through these quickly. Just to review, this is from before as Roger was speaking. These are the harmonics here that Paul and I saw in the literature for the key harmonics that Antoine Freire used, 3, 10, 32, and 80, for example. And then here is my equation, the harmonics predicted by golden ratio times Planck: 2.78, 11.8, 30.88, and 80. So we were suspicious that, look, maybe phase conjugation is the principle behind the whole thing. And this is the largest study we think ever done in cancer literature on what frequencies reduce cancer, actually. And as you can see, you can read all this at Theraphi blog site, but there's 5 different studies showed 50 hertz was very helpful for cancer. There's bingo. And 342 hertz was a bingo. And all these harmonics right out of my equation are all the major frequencies in the big study on what frequencies are helpful for cancer. So obviously no coincidence. These are the harmonics in red here of in red predicted by my equation, low frequency harmonics. And these in green are the major harmonics of the spine liquid pump, the sacrocranial, and the harmonics that make the Schumann, the Kundalini and bliss. And the one here that's not even labeled is the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, which is the most important. And so I won't do all these slides, but this was how we thank Patrick for helping make this slide. But see, these are the harmonics from my equation, predicting here the key Schumann harmonics, predicting here the key sacrocranial harmonics and breath harmonics, and the key brainwave harmonics. So you see the equation is very embracing. That's the same picture, this picture we saw before. So yes, and to finish this segment, just to say, so this could lead to a wave theory of cancer. And this is something that I think could produce some discussion here, perhaps. If you think of cell metabolism as long waves coming in, think of food, and short waves going out. The short wave that goes out from the caduceus cascade of energy wavelengths called cell metabolism is obviously, from the point of view of biophysics, high quality coherent UV light, blue fire, sex juice, and intermediary is the DNA precursor. So the cell massages the wavelengths from food in to UV, blue fire out. And that's a cascade. And when the cell finishes making its sex juice, its creative juices, it has a choice. The coherent UV either triggers meiosis, mitosis, cell division, promiscuity, or is there a way out for that coherent UV light, which is the motor of cellular biophysics, as any biophysicist knows. And so what defines cancer is contact inhibition. If you touch it, does it inhibit replication? It's a definition of cancer. And we know now that a spherical cell is more cancerous because it's harder and doesn't respond to touch. So obviously, if you make charge distribution possible, a way out from that cascade, charge distribution efficiency is the opposite of cancer. And obviously, fractality not only is charge compression efficiency, but it's also, by definition, the Rose charge distribution efficiency. And examples of this include the famous work, bioelectronics of Vincent, showing you can predict what cell has cancer just by the 3 redox, resistance, and pH, and why basically redox is charge distribution efficiency. So this leads to a whole conversation about what the Theraphi is doing to make the body's electric field more rose-like and therefore distributing its charge. And that has lots of psychological meanings. And many psychologists have had good luck with Theraphi getting people to a deeper state quicker as well. We can talk about the Stargate phenomena, the portal. I mean, there's lots of ways to go in the conversation from here. I think, Roger, when you and I talked about this conversation, we also talked about Kate Forbes recently using the Theraphi in a kind of shamanic way in South Africa. You know, how would a shaman use plasma? And maybe I'll stop this screen share for a minute. You know, first, let's talk about what the plasma is doing in terms of enabling containment of centripetal force and entropy, which is what we're discussing, and then why that enables the possibility of action at a distance. And probably even half of our Theraphi centers now are doing remote healing, many with amazing results. And we think we understand the physics, perhaps better than Einstein, who called that spooky. When the wave is compressed and able to be propagating as a longitudinal wave, first of all, physics knows that will go through about anything. And second of all, if it then crosses again at a distance, basically in a conjugate angle, then it will resynthesize transverse, contain heat, and do magic stuff. And so you can have the whole thing about stargates and portals and beam me up, Scotty. It's the beginning of all the real interesting physics. So we can even advise our people, as we had from the beginning, that we know for sure that things like Theraphi will probably work better. We know they will. If you take the time to do a bit of dowsing when you install it, the way the Kozyrev mirror people did, they did it with a magnetometer. They needed a certain number of nanotesla of flux density of Earth magnetic line cross. And then you could install a Kozyrev mirror or a labyrinth or a cathedral or a burial ground or any of these things. This works better if. And these are the places, by the way, that Bruce Cathy proved the nuclear critical mass was effective. Longitudinal embedded. So having the sender and receiver at magnetic line crosses of the Earth, the physics of Druid phone calls works better. We know why. Also, sunrise, sunset work a little better. Surface propagation. Also, sunrise, sunset is the right angle physics of phase conjugation. That's why Agnihotra works so well at those hours. So there's, once you understand the physics of these things, you can work with them more intelligently. So in the advanced way, Kate and her group in South Africa, and we thank Claire there for the introduction, Theraphi Center, South Africa, she is actively using the Theraphi plasma as a kind of portal. And there's a lot of astral hygiene issues, but she's actually having experiences like Leadbeater and Besant, seeing the subatomic particle geometries exactly as in occult chemistry, as a bit of a portal, the Anu, truly, with the help of Theraphi. And she's very conscious, again, as many people are, our group in Perpignan, that Theraphi assists often with not just the medical intuitive, but with clairvoyance. And we think we know why. The physics of the Kirlian is basically a high voltage bias, which enables the aura to become visible because the voltage bias enables the charge field of the body to become visible, and the weak charge field of the body then made visible, and it's the physics of clairvoyance. So
Dan, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the developments in stem cells and using the Theraphi. And also to the folks out there, make sure that you put your questions down into the Q&A section. When we're towards the end of this webinar, we're happy to take your questions, and we're going to be looking at the Q&A section in about a half an hour. But for now, Dan, yeah, there's some exciting news about stem cells, and there's a lot of research happening with stem cells, stem cell therapy, and so forth. And so we are predicting that the Theraphi will be able to be used, perhaps for one thing, storage of stem cells. Did you know that about 80% of them die after extraction? And so the Theraphi can be used for storage of seeds and plants and many things, including stem cells. So that's one very straightforward application. But you've got some other ideas on stem cells, so it'd be good to hear about it.
It's true, and thank you, Roger, for encouraging us in these directions. Some of your original suggestions were helpful as well. Thank you. And it's true, many of our partners now are involved with what are called mesenchymal stem cells, which don't require, the fetal stem cells. And for example, the key to the original discovery of stem cells was to do something called dedifferentiation. Basically, the stem cell was originally called a stem because it is at the stem or root of a fractal. Well, how cool. And what that means is that, at the base of the spine are the original cells, which were very dedifferentiated, which then specialized, which is to say differentiated to become the specialized cell of the body. But if the cell is very dedifferentiated, then it can specialize in anything. So they take it back to the root of the fractal tree, And the word time reversal has been often used in the connection with what needs to happen to a cell to de-differentiate to a stem cell, because it goes back to the root of the fractal tree like the first zygote, as it were, the first egg. So obviously, if we're at all correct about time reversal here, that time reversal and de-differentiation, that we should be able to dramatically increase the rate and likelihood of de-differentiation with a properly phased conjugate field. And we're also, Paul and I have many conversations about optimizing and, you know, tweaking this. But we have wonderful partners already who are deeply involved, including Jay from South Spain, who just sent his doctor partner here from Mallorca, who, by the way, is very committed now to developing this in his major dental clinic for pain and rejuvenation in the jaw. But anyway, so they're very conscious of this, and there's actually two major groups. One is, it's actually from Stanford. We're not allowed to mention the name right now. Who's very committed to us and is working in the mesenchymal stem cells greatly, and he's proposed serious collaboration, and we're very excited. Is cooking nicely, we'll see. But that both those groups are very much aware that whether or not we can prove that we increase de-differentiation, you know, back through the fractal in the stem cells, which is fun and wonderful, and we absolutely think we can. However, the fact is, the biggest part of the mesenchymal stem cells, in fact, most stem cells, is simply you take the blood cell from the body, the T cell, out, and then you need to make that T cell super, super happy. So you take that cell out and you super nourish the thing until it's like a very ambitious bullet, and then you put that back in the body. Well, how do you get that cell super nourished? Well, you need the ideal growth media, the plasma, as it were. And the ideal growth media is where these, that one of our partners says, well, the money is in actually the making the growth media, literally the water and the nutrient media for the stem cells, which obviously, you know, with the plant growth record of the Theraphi, and now Paul's development of zapping the water, they're very excited about that as well, Paul. It's very cool. That when you put the high voltage arc on the water, that you increase the order in the water so tremendously. And Paul actually sent, maybe this is a good time to talk about the water thing a little bit.
Yeah, you have some slides there, Dan, that you can put up with the Aquify, just for reference. Yes. For there's folks that maybe haven't seen it yet. We did release it last week in Paul's webinar.
Yes, thank you. And I think I had that.
Yeah, just a little word from the sponsor here. Next week, we've got Bloom the Desert webinar with myself and Leyland Minter. And hopefully this Aquify is going to be working brilliantly one day on the Bloom the Desert. So we've got that. And also, special announcement, we're going to have Michael Rice on December the 5th with his Sacred Geometry and Bioarchitecture. So there's just some announcements there, and I'll be emailing you out all of the links to attend those webinars. So back to you, Dan.
And great, and I'm glad you mentioned Leyland Mintner, our partner, Rogers and my old friend near Byron, Australia, who's developing the agricultural ormes combined with these amazing growth products, both for agriculture and for bees. And you know, agricultural ormes, the ormes is the magic of being centripetal. The Ark of the Covenant could make the Mana Holy Communion, which was literally ormes, because it was implosive capacitance. So implosive capacitance, which is, you know, the physics behind agricultural ormes, which is behind what Roger tested agricultural ormes in the early Bloom the Desert days, and now Roger's developing this wonderful partnership with our longtime friend Leyland Mintner in Australia. So the agricultural ormes part of it has a lot to do with the alchemy part of this, which is Paul's specialty. So many of these threads are coming together. Just at this moment, Paul, would you like to comment a little bit, review what you said about this Aquify test and nitrogen? Would you mind briefly?
Right. Yeah, well, what it's actually doing is it's, because the pH is dropping, it's pulling nitrogen out of the air, and it's forming nitric acid in the water, as well as nitrogen dioxide. And this is why I say is not the kind of water that you're going to want to drink. It's plants may, and the bacteria in the soil will really love it, but not for human consumption. Nitrogen dioxide is it's a fairly nasty compound that you don't want in your body whatsoever. However, for the soil and the plants, and it's also making nitrates. And so depending on the chemical makeup of the existing minerals that are in the water, and that's where we're kind of experimenting with things now, how to custom tweak your solutions to basically, instead of making fertilizers from ammonia as we've done in the past, it's a really simple way to get the nitrogen into your fertilized water by pulling it straight from the air. So,
nitrogen fixers are a big miracle for agriculture. So this is a very fascinating field. And so you measured some of that, right, Paul?
Yeah. It has been well known that when, lightning strikes in a field and you get a sudden burst, a bloom of fungi growth, you'll get these rings around where the lightning strike, and it fixes the nitrogen in the soil. And everything grows a lot better where the lightning hits. So it's really makes a lot of sense to just be able to use that. Now, in combination with that highly charged electrical field, we have the bonus of having the Theraphi frequencies resonating in there. So of course the water is all being imprinted with a double whammy there, triple whammy.
Beautiful and great. And then while we're talking about measurement physics and Theraphi and water, should we discuss this Glen Rhine measurement? Can you see this there then?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to start, Paul?
Yeah. Just to note that the beginning numbers are missing off of this. So it's the increase in the conductivity on the left. So it's going up from 0 up to that point in the first 3 minutes.
So what we should summarize a little background here. Remember that Glen Rhine, who is our wonderful friend, and Alan Rode is there. Hi, Alan. And Glen Rhine has been our friend for years, and he made the original measurements of the increase of the enzyme associated with the zipper in proving DNA braid programming increases in the presence of coherent EKG, which was our early work there. Glen Rhine's lab there has been working with us so many years in California. And Glen Rhine was kind enough to join us, thanks to Roger, for our beautiful conference in South France this year, and was kind enough to start some measurements. And Paul helped to have a Theraphi there for a while. So Glen took the Theraphi and basically zapped the water. Presumably, now this is not the new Aquify device. This is just the Theraphi plasma and water. I presume in glass, I would guess, wouldn't you, Paul?
Yeah, just putting a vessel in between the two tubes.
Yeah, and so, but it's funny, what this chart is reminding me of is when we said, sometimes if people leave the water in the Theraphi too long, it can actually mess with the glass. It's quite powerful, and and Paul emphasized to me at that point, this was months ago, he said, no, the Theraphi effect on water is very quick. You only want a few minutes. And I thought of that immediately, Paul, when you showed me this graph here, that the fun part happens. So here is the electrical conductivity in water in the first 2 to 3 minutes inside the Theraphi field goes up 40% by measurement. What is that telling us? It's speaking of increased order, obviously. Decrease in electrical resistance can be very powerful. I mean, we know that we measured the declumping of blood cells in the blood in 70% of the cases in the Theraphi, and which is very healthy because those declumped blood cells that stand by some cells are powerful. So the electrical conductivity of the water would be related to that increased order, and therefore increased bioavailability, increased solubility, all that stuff. So very cool, very obviously related to the fact that this increases growth. But so maybe we could speculate a minute, Paul, about why that effect then begins to decay.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that too, because you got to look at it like a battery that's getting charged up. So it started at 0 and it got to its maximum point and it's fully charged. Well, now you've established the field around it, that vessels come to its steady state where it's fully charged. and then you're just continuing that charge. So anything that's going over in that field effect that's around it, now within that vessel, it started dissipating and moving out of the vessel, and the charge is extending. So you've got your maximum amount at the peak, and then if you over pressurize it, then it'll start to decay. Kind of like be the idea of living in a church or something like that.
Yeah, and interesting, we might speculate that if the experiment were being done in what is in quote unquote a sacred space, and we now know electrically what that means, it's an area where the air is fractal enough to support charge distribution without bleeding charge, like, you know, sacred burial ground for the Hopis or something. So if you have some kind of good charge space, then probably we would hypothesize that that decay would be less rapid. And by the way, we have tools for measuring that. flameinmind.com, the life force measurement there, measuring the Schumann harmonics of the tree. We use the brainwave transducer. So you can actually measure whether your environment supports that distribution. But in any case here, Paul, we could probably then begin to speculate that people who want to zap water in the Theraphi, which lots of people have reported dramatic and wonderful results, they can taste the difference, it's amazing, that probably, you know, 2 to 4 minutes is about best. Would you agree? Or?
Yeah, definitely so.
Yeah. That are relatively, and that's
a little bit longer if you were to spike the water with, say, some minerals, do you think, or something like that?
It will change, but the thing about water is it's so dynamic, it rapidly responds to anything, any signal going into it. It's like, you know, from using transverse waves or magnetic waves or even a longitudinal wave, when you have it's probably the slowest, is kind of reverse. It responds quicker to these transverse waves, because when you have let's say a plate in the shelf moving and it slips, and then it creates this longitudinal wave underneath the water that's, you know, moving through the ocean and slowly coming up towards the land. And as it rises on the beach, like as Dan's demonstration, then all of a sudden you have the tsunami. So
that's a conversion from up and down to longitudinal and back. That's the tsunami is converting, and that's a useful example. And maybe that might lead us to
the water tsunami.
Yeah. So might lead us to some of the questions in our chat window. I see that David Koss is asking.
We really don't want to do questions yet. We're going to do that towards the end of the webinar. So, Paul, like you're going to be in New York in about a week's time, and we're doing some live events with Paul on November the 30th, for instance, Friday night, and Saturday we've got 2 workshops. Paul, is it possible that you actually get some nitrogen testing done in the water over the next week, just to put some pressure on you?
No, it takes time. I'm hoping after Christmas in January, early January, to actually sit down and
fair enough. Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, but we are excited about the development of the Aquify, but obviously we do need some more.
Well, there's a number of papers. Like, the thing is, this became a hot topic recently in academic literature, and a lot of people are writing papers about it, because a few universities, you know, started playing with this, and they were really curious about what was doing it. So it's well documented of what high voltage electricity on the surface of the water in an air atmosphere is doing. So if you looked up plasma activated water online, you'll find, and go to Google Scholar, don't go to the regular internet, to find, you know, good credible papers on what's going on there, and it's quite amazing.
Yeah,
that's just one aspect to it.
And the idea that plasma will activate water is directly related to the central hydrogen bond, which we now understand the fractality of so perfectly. And that, so the water's ability to receive the charge is related directly to the fractality of the core of the bond structure. And that if the water then is ordered and the plasma effect is sustainable, and that then relates to later what would cause that charge to decay, like exposure to too much metal or high pressure or high temperature reduces that spin density and therefore solubility in the water. And that's a story we know very well from years of research at the imploder.com, which would relate directly to then plasma activated water from Theraphi as well.
Right.
And also might bring up the conversation about hydrogen whenever you're
ready. Perfect timing, Dan, because let's talk about some of the other technologies. Now, if anybody's got any questions about the Aquify or anything up to this point, remember, just put it into the Q&A section. That's the only section that we're going to be looking at towards the end of the webinar. So we do want to discuss some of the other technologies. So for instance, Dan and I started a project that I always called the Melbourne project. We had the Manhattan project, and we started this off in Melbourne a decade ago. And it is some of our projects from Breakthru Technologies. They're always slowly moving ahead. Nothing's actually come to a brick wall. And the interesting thing about the hydrogen project was we discovered not what to do, which is, in R&D, half the challenge. And so we're actually into a whole new sort of enthusiasm and with the hydrogen project. So essentially we took Dan's frequencies and we're trying to kind of wiggle the hydrogen away from the oxygen and make a more efficient, process of getting hydrogen. And that requires what we call a fractal antenna. So Dan, do you want to just give a little overview of the hydrogen project? And by the way, folks, for those who have signed up for the webinar, I'm going to email out a link to the Breakthru Technologies page that we just updated last night. And you can read about a lot more about the hydrogen fractal antenna project. But Dan, if you could give us an overview.
Yeah, well, so just a quickie. The thing that was cool, this is some of the lab that Roger and I, with friends, with Roger's support as well, put together in Melbourne, and signal generator, complex wave generator, and high gain amplifier, triggering the hydrolysis with greater efficiency with this complex wave shape, which is basically what Canzius did. These are pictures from the lab and some of the cells we used. I wanted to show you the Canzius equation. I don't know if the Canzius equation. So there's this famous story that, so this guy named Canzius famously used a radio frequency wave, which was at 13.56 megahertz. And he radiated it on a glass of cold water, and it's burning beautifully. The cold water is burning beautifully in dozens of YouTube videos. And so obviously we thought, well, we should be able to perfect that. And the day we decided to do that was when we realized that that frequency he used was literally exactly my equation, Planck times Inverse-1 golden ratio. So it was basically an implosive RF frequency, very exactly, which conveniently turns out to have been the palladium sputtering frequency, and frequency that's well known in electronics for efficiency, and now we know why. So we thought we could perfect that, and we still are very convinced that we know how to perfect that, but we got only so far in Melbourne, and that was because you can generate that complex wave, and you don't even need such a complex wave we realize now, but Canzius was clear. You had to radiate that from an RF antenna with sufficient power in a form which he called circularly polarized, which we now know means a longitudinal RF antenna. And the design for that antenna is something we didn't finish in that setup we had in Melbourne there. We had a great start, but we have new partners for this, and it's cooking nicely. And if people are interested, they should communicate with Roger. We have two separate partners now who've completed design for that circularly polarized antenna. Basically, the other picture of how to make a longitudinal wave applies here. So that's kind of the hydrogen project. And there are others of the technology projects. We could talk about a few, like the carbon nano, if you like. They're all at implosiongroup.com as well.
Good. So yes, for folks, there are a couple of projects sort of moving forward, and of course, some of these projects have come to the marketplace. For instance, imploder.com has been a water treatment device that Dan's had on the market for about a decade now, and it's proven itself up really, really well. We've also got the release of the Fractal Wave, which is a stock market algorithm. So originally, Dan was the pioneer in biofeedback, and the first, in a way, the first to start to measure emotion with electricity. And we took Dan's original biofeedback mechanism, and we treated the stock market as just one big biofeedback mechanism. And then there was layers and layers, dozens and dozens and dozens of other layers of computer programming. We had one of the top computer programmers, stock market programmers in the world working on this. It took several years to develop and test, but we actually released it at the beginning of this year. And we're still going through various validations, but we are getting 70%, success rate. We will be releasing some virtual trading soon, like, what if you did actually throw money at this? We do have a subscription-based at the moment. I'm going to email out, it's fractalwave.works, that I'll email all of that out to you with the recording link in about 24 hours. So Dan and Paul, was there any other areas you want to discuss before we get into the questions?
Well, I just maybe two quick comments. One is regarding fractal wave, what Roger said about measuring emotion, telling us how to measure the way out of chaos. It's actually very simple. If you treat the stock market variable as simply a chaotic oscillator like the heart, for example, and you take a spectrum analysis power spectrum and then a second order power spectrum, you can determine the moment at which it becomes coherent enough to become predictable. So understanding how to measure the coherence in any chaotic oscillator can tell you when it's coming out of chaos. And that was a fundamental identity that we applied to the stock market. And it was Merrill there who did fabulous programming. We started with that fundamental idea, and it turned out to be powerful. It was really cool. And the second thing I just wanted to say is we mentioned the carbon nano project. We have wonderful partners. Just to say, you know that carbon nano is 32 times stronger than steel and will replace lots of industries on the planet. And carbon, when it grows correctly as a nano, looks like Buckminster fullerene, which is literally the Star Mother kit, which is negentropic. Do you see? It's implosive, it's self-organizing. And the electric field to make it grow good, you know what that electric field is? That's the field we've been talking about all night, right here, phase conjugate field. So there's obvious reasons why we have wonderful people playing with us in that area. And so there's lots of wonderful projects cooking. There's more links there, our propulsion project. And so you can look at Roger's site and also implosiongroup.com.
Great. Paul, what have you got planned for the future of humanity?
Oh boy, I don't know. Too many things. I've got too many things on the go right now.
You get enough with just the Equify,
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know where to begin. I mean, yeah, just stay tuned. This next year, 2019 is going to be a big year. It's going to be really good.
We can assure you that there are some major developments planned with plugins and extensions of Theraphi, and Paul and I are cooking on some amazing stuff, and we have to keep that together until we're ready to really announce, but really exciting cooking.
Well, Paul is doing New Energy Systems in New York on the 1st of December at 2 o'clock, and it's like a 2 to 3 hour session here. Paul's here at the very, very end of November, the beginning of December, a Friday night gig. And then we're also doing a session on Lyme's disease on Saturday morning. So I will be emailing out all of the information for Paul in New York, which is coming up pretty soon, folks. So for now, let's, guys, do you see the Q&A section?
Yeah.
So,
well, yes.
Shelley, is there a difference between the Equify and the Theraphi water during a session, especially in regard to nitrate availability, nitrate, nitrogen, or nitrogen in drinking water? There you go.
Yeah. So traditionally, the way everybody's doing it now is safe for drinking water, and that's simply exposing the water to the plasma of the tubes and putting in the field. So you just have a vessel in between the two tubes. If you want, you can create a vortex in there and get that spinning. So that water there is not going to pull the nitrates in from the air or anything like that. The Aquify is specifically designed for the agricultural water that does the nitrogen draw.
Good. There's a question.
Maybe I could take
Dan,
the next question here.
Yeah.
Well, I see the next question on that list from Mike. Can Dan talk a little bit about the triploder and ploder shower? And if one were to buy the triploder, is that the best and most thorough for water enhancement? Also, is a plumber required? No, a plumber is really not required. It's the most common 3/4-inch male fitting, both ends, very easy to install. You do want to, if you take the super imploder, it's a bit heavy, you want to support, but plumber not, if you can, if you want to, fine, but not necessary. But in terms of, you know, the old question, the imploder shower and the triploder have no magnetic section, but if the water is relatively hard water, making the vortex piezo, then the implosive capacitance around the vortex will be significantly centripetal and quite powerful without the magnetics. So triploder is used powerfully by the biodynamics people for what they call the perfected dynamization. And so if you have a little bit of enough mineral in the water, the vorticity, you can do a lot of powerful stuff for the triploder and the imploder shower with a simple vortex. Because remember, if plants are sitting next to a vortex that is piezo, and that vortex is implosive, you know, it spontaneously gets colder, that the plant will grow faster in that charge field without even getting that water. And the reason is because it's centripetal, for the same reason we began this whole conversation this evening. An implosive charge field is bioactive. And maybe while I'm at it here, I'll just, one more question I saw in the other list there, Roger, was someone was asking about if the water is forced through metal pipes, does it invert the spin? I would say it might be simplistic to say inverting the spin, but it's true that that material like steel and aluminum will deplete the charge in water a little faster than appropriate capacitive insulator. Even most non-metallics are better to hold charge in water than a steel or aluminum pipe. A copper pipe's a little better. So it's true that in addition to heat and pressure causing loss of charge in water, also too much exposure to steel and aluminum is true. The charge will remain in the water for a reason. We found we got 2 or 3 days of storage of the imploder effect in tank storage in UK tests. But since I think the spin density induced by Theraphi is a higher frequency spin, I think you get a higher amount of charge, but then that storage time might be a little bit lower.
Good.
Yeah.
From Tibor, there's it's not so much a question from Tibor, and maybe you could have a quick little look at his question here. Yeah. It's not really a question.
Good suggestion. Yeah, what he's saying there is basically taking your pulse width modulator to create the subharmonic frequencies for your distances in electrolysis for splitting apart hydrogen oxygen. You know, the traditional physics model that's in every textbook that shows 2 electrodes like 10 centimeters apart, giving off hydrogen on one side and oxygen on the other. We're light years ahead of, you know, what they've been teaching. Well, even Faraday, who came up with the process in the first place, was light years ahead of what they're teaching today in the physics as far as splitting water and oxygen goes. But yeah, good suggestion there, Tibor.
Yeah.
Maybe I could play with that question here. I see in the other from Axel, he says, I believe negative emotions can be transverse wave and the heart is purifying the emotions. Does it mean the emotions are transformed to longitudinal when they get purified, which you call phase conjugation ? And obviously a complex question, but I would just suggest something to meditate on. That we mentioned before, when famous Ray Moody has shown with many medical surgeons now that the visions people see during death are electrically contagious. It's well known and well proven. So everybody in the room, if they're sensitive, is going to see the same thing during a good, effective death experience, meaning a successful death experience obviously is an implosive black hole for a very good reason. And we know exactly also the sequence of geometric vision seen during death, well documented, the Heinrich-Klüver form constants. You can see the article, goldenmean.info/immortality. So what is happening at death to make it successful? You know, implosive phase conjugation, well, probably. And what does that mean? That means the charge envelope of your body needs to complete that compression to get that acceleration into what I believe are longitudinal electromagnetics, which I believe account for a lot of the conversation about collective unconscious, ancestral memory, communion of saints, that distribution of charge, ancestral burial grounds. Every Aboriginal tribe knows that ancestral memory is the most important thing in your culture, and we think participating in that. And the simple example, again, would probably be, you know, evolving to being able to lucid dream means that you're able to focus on a longitudinal wave and probably going to take memory through death. So yes, I do think purifying your emotions means your attention becomes more resolved enough to go to a longitudinal wave attention, what the Egyptians called the Ba from the Ka. And I've spoken about that many times. And that's a little harder there probably in New York City where the sirens are blowing there, Roger.
We love those fire engines. Makes our day here in Manhattan. So there's a question from Daniel. How can this help limit the cost of feeding in plants?
That's what we're about to find out, I think, this year. That's where.
Well, we have some data that typically you could save up to 30% of the amount of water needed in irrigation with the imploder.com. And we know that Theraphi plasma treated water also dramatically increases the wetting, the surface tension, surfactant, solubility, hydration, similar to the imploder. And so although we haven't done all those trials yet, the preliminary reports and pictures are amazing. So we think the principle is there. Wetter water, increased spin density, increased solubility, reduces the amount of water and actually the amount of nutrient required, obviously. Yeah. And that will relate to what Roger developed with Bloom the Desert and now adding the agricultural ormes, which Roger will speak more about when he has on the line from Byron next week, right, Roger?
That's next week, Wednesday night, 8 p.m. New York time, and it will be Thursday morning in Australia for Leyland. So we'll get him bright and early. So there's some comments from David. He's got it's not so much a question, I don't think, from David. He says, H2O turns to H2O2 in 13 seconds by electrical influence.
That spin density would increase the oxygen solubility. And so fixing that oxygen makes the water more magic. That's true. And defining what that electric spin is and how to optimize it is very profound and useful comment. I'd like to, the bottom note by Reverend Dr. Ash there.
Well, let's just go through them one by one, Dan, just
okay.
in order, otherwise we'll be all over the show. So the next question is from Billy. In what way does the Theraphi enhance essential oils?
We have had lots of people use Theraphi to zap hemp marijuana oil, and cannabis oil is very famous, obvious for cancer treatment. And we think we know why, because it's a media for charge storage, actually. And so essential oils are beautiful charge storage mechanisms. So again, you want to do it in a glass container, you want to avoid heat, but zapping essential oils with Theraphi has proven efficient. In fact, we have a specialist who does nothing but ship us the hemp oil to be zapped with Theraphi. It's so powerful. And we've had many examples where the synergy of the essential oil zapped with Theraphi, along with the Theraphi treatment itself, are the kind of synergy that produces wonderful results. And using the Theraphi zapped water at the same time. So yes, the essential oil is a medium for charge. Perfect, yes.
Absolutely, yes. A lot of folks are starting to use it for their products. Next question from Chris: is the Theraphi based on the Priori system?
You know, Theraphi was inspired largely by Priori, and we thought about it for many years. Paul and I, we've talked for many years about it. But it was the day we realized the principle behind Theraphi. Remember, the French government spent millions and millions helping Priori and they couldn't perfect it because they didn't understand why. Priori clearly did not know what phase conjugation was. He did not know he needed to be a pair. He did not know what neg entropy was. So he was shooting in the dark using sort of kitchen recipes from Lukovsky. He did amazing work for as far as he got. But we think we have gone a lot further than that. And we have some wonderful new developments to be announced soon that will take it to a next step as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question here from Rev. Are you able to summarize that very, very quickly, Dan? Because there's a lot of text there, just for the folks listening. Would you consider taking exosomes and how their Equify tech would accelerate healing versus PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic fields with stem cell injection?
Yes, well, just in general, we believe that PEMF could be effective, and it obviously is useful. And we also believe that the right pulse geometry, the ultimate pulse geometry for healing, is implosive, obviously. Remember that famous, there's a Moire device and several devices that reduced pain. And then we graphed the perfect pulse wave that turned out to be a caduceus, implosive. So yes, we think PEMF is helpful, and we think the perfect pulse geometry is exactly the equation behind Theraphi, which would then perfect that in theory. And related to mesenchymal stem cells, that's what I was talking about earlier, which is, you know, that the trick is that your stem cell doesn't have to be from you know, the fetal at all. You can use a regular stem cell from the blood, actually, and a T cell called mesenchymal, and reverse and de-differentiate it and achieve wonderful power. And all the laws, the difficult laws that are being passed in many countries making stem cells legally tricky do not apply to mesenchymal, meaning it's actually legal and it's easier and it's better, and our partners are deep into that. But I don't think I can go deeper into that conversation right now.
No, we'll be releasing material of that as it comes through, yeah. Question from Thomas, is this webinar recording video? Well, yes, Thomas, everything's, the video and the audio is being recorded, and I'll be sending out a link to everybody. Next question.
If the pipes get calcium buildup, yes. Decalcification of pipes, demineralization of buildup inside pipes is how magnetic water treatment was invented, actually. So it's obvious you can decalcify the buildup in your pipes with magnetic water treatment. That's old news. And if you add the solubility to the spin, that's what superimploder is. And we're very good at decalcifying pipes, absolutely. Because it's simple. Solubility increase, that's what takes out the crap inside your pipe. So it's very, very easy. Terry Brower's there. Does vorticing water help left or right make a difference? Considering that spin left at life enhancing, right, is the right hand spin evil or is the left hand spin evil? You know, that gets to be a too simplistic a question, actually. We have a website about that, goldenmean.info/magnetics. And basically, if you can answer this question, then you can answer that question, okay? And here's the question. Every living protein on this planet, the DNA, the helix, goes one way only. It's called an enantiomorphism. That's right. So now, if you know why every protein, the helicity is in one direction only, then you can answer your question. Interestingly, there's almost no biologist on this planet that claims to be able to answer that question. But I can give you a clue to meditate on. I think let's meditate on that and go on. But the meditation is this. We know that the lightning spun the first protein to make primal soup. Now, if the polar DC direction of that lightning, remember, lightning comes in all polarities, but if the dominant polarity of the lightning that made primal soup into life was centripetal, then the proteins would have been driven together in the helix. Where if the DC polarity was centrifugal, it would have blown them apart. Not so good. So we could actually do the trials. Now that we know that it's lightning what makes primal soup go, the DC, the polarity of that lightning, which way would answer your question. And I'm going to leave that meditation there unless anyone says anything.
Right. Well, we are getting towards the end of the webinar, folks. There's a couple of, just a few more questions here. So Shelley is asking about the Flame in Mind.
Yes.
You have a website for that, Dan, yeah? And maybe
new flameinmind.com is now upgraded to 4-channel. Beautiful, because if the rear brain is taught to be dominant and the front brain relaxed, you have in the flow, which is the most important thing to learn if you're an athlete, actually, and also if you want to be intuitive. You need to teach rear brain dominance, because that's where you have the reactivities faster. And so the 4-channel EEG now in flameinmind.com is much more powerful, and that upgrade is free. Anybody that's had Flame in Mind, just use the App Store and do the free upgrade. Very simple question.
Good. There's a question from Chris. Can an automobile engine work with charged Aquify water that separates hydrogen and fuels the pistons? Well, there you go, Paul. There's your next project. We want the Thera car. We've got Theraphi. We want the Phi car.
It would be interesting to put the Aquify water in a Joe cell, because you know the Joe cell, they had to condition the water before it would work in the Joe cell. So it would be interesting to see if the Aquify water would.
Exactly. Well, I think we'll be using the Aquify water on the hydrogen project with Dan as well.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, we had laboratory data in 2 countries, Canada and South America, that the imploder water in hydrolysis reduced the power wattage required for hydrolysis by 20%. And we replicated that study, and we know why. And hydrolysis is what Canzias was. So yes, and that's precedent for Therapy. So there's lots of implications there. Yes.
Yeah. Watch this space, Chris. We'll have a car for you in a year or 2. There's a question from Daniel. Is there any way to calculate the amount of nutrient needed in that case? This is a carry on from his previous question about the water and treatment. So in a nutshell, Daniel, you know, when you charge water, you know, the redox factor, the plant is able to absorb nutrients. It's going to become a stronger, healthier, more nutrient-dense plant. But in agriculture, there's lots of factors, the type of soil, the climate, etc. So there's not really an exacting way of calculating the amount of nutrient needed. Basically, you would be, you know, as a farmer, you're always watching your plants and, you know, testing what nutrients and how much water. And, you know, it's quite usually a bit of a fine-tuning process. However, we have Australia's #1 biochemist next week here. Leyland Minter is an absolute genius with farming, use of agriculture, use of all sorts of organics. He's one of Australia's top organic research and developers. So I highly recommend that you tune in next week with Leyland to answer your questions about water and ormus. And Leyland has developed some very, very exciting projects that we're releasing to the market, you know, within a month or 2, if not sooner. And so I do suggest that you, Daniel, follow up with next week with some of those questions. But in a nutshell, you know, there are some variables in nature that you have to take into case. But essentially, you know, the whole thing about treated water is you are going to reduce your water consumption. The nutrients that you do use are going to be more effective. So overall, you certainly reduce your costs. Moving on to the next question.
The solubility effect, exactly. The next question was about
how to
explain love and death.
Your formula. Yes, we're really into formulas for death. And the advanced formula is the love formula. Okay, take it away, guys. There's your question for today.
Well, Well, no, but we are saying love came from the words long wave phi ratio, low phi, meaning long wave embedding and embeddability, perfect nesting. You draw that and you make a Valentine and the Grail. So love is really about embedding one aura inside the other, that the non-destructive compression physics of Tantra really does apply. And by the way, the love wave from Centix, the touch that says love is a golden ratio envelope. All of that is at goldenmean.info/touch. So we have some, the wave shapes of emotions are defined, and the love wave is in fact golden ratio moment of max pressure as ratio of duration of the envelope of the pressure wave of the touch. And in death, we just talked about it. It's actually the experience of that charge implosion, and the sequence of visions fits that Heinrich Clouvet and that article with the pictures, goldenmean.info/immortality. So yes, perfect embedding is really an answer to those questions. Non-destructive compression is a meaningful way to look at those issues. Yes.
Good.
Love is the charge that holds all things together. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a good note to end on.
And there's a question, only two more questions, folks. There's a question from Sue. Water that has Brown's gas bubbled through it is high in hydrogen and Brown's gas. How does this water compare to the Aquify water?
Well, it's interesting that Brown's gas water is really beneficial for several things. You can drink it and apply it externally. Now, the time factor is a part of it, because the hydrogen's leaving much quicker than the oxygen. The oxygen will stay in that water, but the hydrogen leaves quite quickly. So to get it fully saturated, you can't store that water. And I don't know if the Aquify water is going to be the same as well. It's too early to determine. But it's not going to be similar, because it's the Brown's gas water is directly from water in a sealed environment in a common ducted electrolysis system. So there's going to be no nitrogen or anything else that's going to be affecting the water that's in there. So when you get the Brown's gas out, it's pure hydrogen and nitrogen in a special gaseous crystal, if you will. But the Aquify water is going to be completely different. Think of it more as a component. You're using fire in an alchemical sense to unite air and water. And it's going to be a really interesting combination. So in essence, we're getting the content of the nitrogen content from the air in the Aquify.
Yeah. And our last question is from Nicholas. How does the spinning fluid and thus converting energy into center implosion has a higher charge? Well, it's charge density, but Dan, do you want to answer that?
Well, you know, whether it's the movie Powder or Daniel Brinkley's two successful near-death experiences during lightning, either way, at the center of the vortex is increased spin density, and therein lies increased awareness density. But if you want to live at the center of a lightning bolt, otherwise known as Kundalini, it means you need to focus only on shareable thoughts. When you put the crown on a king, increasing the mentation rate, he will inhabit the kingdom better because his thought field will expand if he can withstand charge implosion. But if that king is angry when you put the crown on him, he will go nuts faster, which means, you know, there is going to be a test of pure intention of it being a shareable wave the closer you get to the center of that lightning bolt. It is about spin density, but you get there gradually. You don't want to go there all at once, because an unshareable thought, you will be toast. Yeah. Pure principle is what survives.
Good.
Yeah, one last question about Anarchapulco in February next year. We'd like to try. Don't know, it's a bit far out to plan for that yet, but like to try to be there again. It was so much fun. Love to do it again.
And Ron, I see your question. Let's have a chat on the phone sometime, Ron, too. That's fine. It's been too long. Anytime, guys. You can reach me.
Good.
And thank you, Ron.
Any final comments? Paul, just a final comment from you?
Well, I think that concept of, the question about love and how this charge is really holding everything together, and that's somewhat how I've always seen the big scale of where are we in this cosmic wonderland that we find ourselves in. And it's one of the, these philosophical questions that come up. Why and how are we here? And I think that love is a really good way to understand love as being the glue and the charge that is holding all this together in this amazing electrical universe that we live in.
I love that, Paul. I agree completely. In fact, I'm remembering the substance of we feeling in the famous Sufi books by Doris Lessing. And she would say, well, if you go into a house where there's been love there, you feel a kind of syrupy quality to the air. She called it the substance of we. And that embeddability starts the whole process of connectivity, the perfect wormhole, as it were. So that's a beautiful theme to end on. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Right.
Well, thank you everybody for being with us today. And thanks to Dan Winter and Paul Harris. And as I've mentioned, you will get a recording. And we do have webinars for the next 2 weeks. There's Bloom the Desert with Leyland next Wednesday. And then we've added Michael Rice, Bioarchitecture, for the following week. And you will be getting some newsletters out about that. And Paul Harris is here live and in person in New York City in about a week's time. So I will send you some information on that. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Dan. Thank you, Paul.
Blessings. Blessings. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Roger. Stay in touch, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for being with me.
Bye from Alan Rose.
Bye, Alan. It's been fun. See you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.